It started as a routine patrol in the North Atlantic, calm waters, steady radar blips, until one faint signal turned an ordinary afternoon into the most intense submarine chase since the Cold War. In August 2025, the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group was doing what American sailors had done for decades, keeping the North Atlantic open for trade, for the world's IKEA furniture, and everything else that made it across the ocean. It was a quiet mission, a rhythm the sailors knew by heart, until a circling aircraft picked up a sound that would change everything. That faint contact marked the start of the most intense submarine hunt since the Cold War. Unbeknownst to the Americans, the Russian Northern Fleet had issued new orders: close in on the American carrier group and gather intelligence at all costs. But Moscow was about to learn why challenging the US Navy in the Atlantic was about as smart as telling your wife she'd gained 10 pounds. Inside the Ford's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer watched the submarine tracks with a calm born from confidence. 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers surrounded the carrier, each one carrying enough firepower to turn any submarine into an artificial reef. Calculations were simple. At their current speed, the Russian submarines would reach torpedo range in 47 minutes. The Russians' torpedoes could cover that distance in less than 6 minutes. But the American destroyers' ass-rock anti-submarine rockets could reach them in under 90 seconds. At 15:03 hours, the admiral asked for the likely intent of the Russian vessels. The answer was clear. At their current course and speed, they'd be within intelligence collection range in 40 minutes. The recommendation was to go to general quarters. The admiral only smiled. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves first. That was assuming they could even stay undetected. Within seconds, Link 16 shared the submarine data across every NATO asset in the region. What happened next looked less like a military maneuver and more like a SWAT team responding to a lemonade stand robbery. A British Type 23 frigate 50 miles north turned south at flank speed. 8 P-8 Poseidons scrambled from bases in Scotland, Norway, and Iceland, each a $130 million submarine hunter, capable of hearing a shrimp sneeze half a kilometer down. Meanwhile, a Virginia-class U.S. submarine, which had been shadowing the Russians since they'd left port 3 days earlier, finally got permission to make its presence felt. By 15:15, the tactical situation had gone from serious to almost comedic. The Russians tried a trick. One submarine ascended to 200 meters and made deliberate noise, while the other 2 dove deeper, attempting to slip through undetected. Classic Wolfpack tactics from 1943. The problem was, this was 2025. NATO's sonar processors could easily distinguish between a noisy decoy and 2 quiet submarines that sounded like a broken shopping cart wheel. The Russians weren't just bold, they were outdated. Their plan was to collect acoustic data on the Ford and her escorts, radar emissions, formation patterns, and electromagnetic signatures. All useful if you plan to one day fight the US Navy. But they were about to experience what happens when you pick a fight in America's ocean. By 1500 hours, the first P-8 Poseidon had arrived. The Russian submarines were about to learn the NATO definition of hammering. The P-8, a militarized Boeing 737, was designed to do one thing: hunt submarines. It started by dropping sonobuoys in a boxing pattern, creating an underwater grid of listening devices. Each buoy blasted active sonar at 140 decibels, louder than a gunshot. Inside the Russian submarine Kazan, the first ping hit like a thunderclap. The entire hull vibrated like a church bell. Sonar operators ripped off their headsets, their ears ringing. The legendary silent service was gone. Every 30 seconds came another ping, relentless, inescapable, deafening. While Russian crews endured the underwater equivalent of torture, the P-8 crews were enjoying climate control, fresh food, and coffee. They rotated shifts every 4 hours, working from what was essentially a flying co-working space, while the Russians sat trapped in a steel coffin beneath the waves. Now, it was the destroyer's turn. The Arleigh Burkes activated their bow-mounted sonar arrays, sending out powerful pulses that stunned fish and painted the ocean floor with sound. The Russians weren't just being hunted, they were trapped in an acoustic hurricane. Then came simulated attack runs. The P-8s dove from 25,000 feet, screaming down as if to launch torpedoes. The Russians, already exhausted, had to react as if every pass was real. Emergency dives, ballast blows, hard turns. Over and over. It was like playing the hand slap game 1,000 times until your nerves gave out. The Kazan tried to outrun them. 30 knots, reactor roaring, 43,000 horsepower. But all it did was make more noise. Their stealth evaporated. The Russians endured this not out of courage, but desperation to record radar signatures and patterns from the ford. Each radar had a unique fingerprint, and they wanted to collect every one. But NATO wasn't going to let them. When the Russian subs launched acoustic decoys, fake sound generators to confuse pursuers, NATO computers classified each in less than a second. Cute, one operator joked, as the real targets remained perfectly tracked. It was like trying to lose the police by throwing a mannequin out of your car, while they had helicopters, satellites, and your license plate number. By hour 24, the hunt had become a masterpiece of coordination. A British frigate arrived towing a 2-kilometer sonar array behind it, listening to the ocean's whispers. MH-60R, Romeo. Helicopters hovered just above the waves, lowering their dipping sonar to probe the depths. The Russians tried to hide beneath thermal layers, zones of changing temperature that could bend sonar. But the dipping sonar pierced through them easily. It was like hiding behind a glass door. Each NATO aircraft had its assigned altitude and radio frequency. P-8s flew between 20,000 and 25,000 feet, helicopters at 500 feet, with 5,000-foot vertical separation between them. Americans talked on UHF, British on VHF, Norwegians on both, acting as translators. The Data Fusion Center in Northwood combined every sonar, radar, and aircraft feed into one live 3D battle space. A display so detailed, it looked like the world's most expensive video game. Helicopters hovered directly over submarines, their sonar dipping and pinging until Russian crews could feel the vibrations in their teeth. The destroyers joined in, deploying their own 1.5-mile-long towed arrays to record every echo. According to one rumor, a Russian submariner asked his captain if they could just surface and apologize because the pings were hurting his stomach. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was a humiliation. NATO had turned the Norwegian Sea into a 48-hour underwater EDM festival where the bass never stopped. Meanwhile, the American Virginia-class submarine trailed the Russians from below, silent and invisible. Running on electric motors, it was practically a ghost with torpedoes. The crew watched everything unfold like a live documentary titled, "Making a Submariner." Why Russia Can't. For 2 days, they recorded every sound, every desperate maneuver. At one point, the American captain sent a single sonar pulse, just enough for the Russians to realize they'd been shadowed the entire time. It was like being stalked by John Cena. You couldn't see him, but you knew he was there. And sometimes he'd whisper, "You can't see me." By day 2, NATO's P-8 crews had developed a cruel rhythm. They timed their sonar pings to interrupt Russian sleep cycles, blasting them awake just as they started to drift off. Ping, ping, ping. For 48 hours, the Russian sailors lived inside a nightmare of constant sound. Hallucinations, exhaustion, nerves on fire. In desperation, the submarines tried everything, hiding in canyons, sprinting to escape, deploying decoys. But NATO countered every move. P-8s used magnetic anomaly detectors to track them even when silent. Destroyers covered every depth. Helicopters hovered overhead like hawks. NATO systems cataloged every decoy like Pokemon cards. Got them all, none useful. Eventually, the Russians aborted the mission. In their report, they'd call it a successful intelligence-gathering operation. In reality, it was a retreat. NATO maintained contact as they withdrew north, escorting them out of the Norwegian Sea. The P-8s even followed halfway home, just to make sure they remembered who owned the ocean. In those 2 days, NATO collected enough acoustic data to identify those submarines anywhere, even from space. Every pump, valve, and toilet flush was now a signature in their database. Russian state media spun it as a victory. Successful intelligence mission. Sure, just like the Titanic successfully tested its iceberg sensors. The lesson was simple, brutal, and unforgettable. You can build all the advanced submarines you want, but if you can't handle 48 hours of democracy's greatest hits, maybe stay out of the deep end next time.